Isn't this new era of automotive just crazy? MG has suddenly risen from the dead and they're dominating the market. Citroën is selling what is essentially a plastic box on wheels. And Ford, well, they had the guts to put the Mustang name to their first halo electric car. Let's face it, I'll let you in on a little bit of a secret. Even those of us that are clued up in the industry, yeah, we have no idea where it's going next. But that's all the fun of it. What's cool about this new electric era is the big guns. They don't have quite as much hold over the nation as they once did. People are more willing to give the once underdogs more of a looking. 5 years ago, if you put a Ford and a Kia in a head-to-head, most people's money would have been on the Ford. But nowadays, well, it's anybody's game. Hey Electroheads, how is everyone? This week I've been having the pleasure of getting back accustomed with the Mustang Mach-E, and rather than a singular review which has been seen a million times on YouTube, I wanted to tackle something a little bit different. So I popped to see my friends at Underwood's Kia in Colchester, and they very kindly lent me their EV6. These are two very stylish SUVs, but which comes out on top? Well, hopefully that's what I'm going to try and answer today. Let's start at the very beginning, at design. Both of these cars are very striking electric SUVs. In fact, until I parked them next to each other, I didn't realise quite how great they both look. Is there a better looking electric SUV on the market? I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments down below. But first of all, let's start with the styling of the EV6. Though the ground clearance isn't all that different, the Kia EV6 is visibly lower. It has a lower roofline, and also this bonnet swoops down quite a lot lower as well. They've also gone for a slightly sleeker and more angular feel. You've got sharp headlamps, and you've also got sharp lines along the front diffuser. The wheels are also slightly larger on this GT line trim in 20 inches. And between that and the low stance of the EV6, it fills the arches really well. It makes it look slightly more aggressive. You do have this sloping coupe roofline. I'm describing this car as an SUV, but it isn't quite an SUV. It's more of a mix between that and a classic hatchback. You've got the swooping roofline onto this rear spoiler, but this design does hinder the practicality in the back, which we'll talk about in a moment. But until then, let's chat about what the Mustang looks like. It's clear that Ford have chosen to stick with their muscle car Mustang heritage, and this car is slightly more bulbous, more muscular. You've got these wide haunches, you've got this quite high bonnet. And actually this whole car, as you can see, rides quite a lot higher than the EV6. Although, for that reason, I think that the wheels finished in 19 inches, they look a little bit small for the car. Although you do get red brake calipers as standard, despite this car not being the performance model. What I do think is very clever about Ford is how they've designed their roofline. So at first glance, it looks like a coupe roofline, but then you realise that actually it's not. It's far more practical. If you look at the difference in these roof heights, it's quite significant, and that's because they've used this gloss black part of plastic, and that kind of gives it a coupe silhouette, but you still get the practicality inside the back of this car. But let's face it, design is very subjective. I can't tell you which one you think looks better. Personally, I like the sleek, sharp look of the EV6, but then I don't need the practical rear space. So let's talk about practicality, starting first up with boots. Now the boot sizes are very, very similar. You've got 490 litres in the Kia EV6, and you've got 502 in the Mustang Mach-E. But as you can see, the Kia EV6's is slightly lower, so it's easier to load items in. The Mustang Mach-E, however, is slightly wider, so you can lift slightly wider items in. They definitely both had their pros and cons. It gets some practical under the bonnet storage as well. Inside here you'll find 52 litres of space if you go for this rear wheel drive model. However, it does shrink to a measly 20 litres if you opt for the four-wheel drive car. It too gets some under the bonnet storage. Inside here you will find 81 litres in the Mach-E. That's far more impressive. Plus, that doesn't change if you go for the all-wheel drive model. You can see there's enough space here to easily fit 2 sets of cables. But practicality doesn't end there. It also has a drainage plug at the bottom, so you can wash out muddy items. How handy is that? Because of that sporty low roofline, it does compromise rear headspace in the back. I'm only 5'5" and I wouldn't want to be much taller. So taller people on long journeys are definitely going to struggle. Also, the middle seat isn't all that usable because this centre armrest is really quite hard. So when you're sitting in the middle, it does dig into your back slightly. However, legroom for me is not a problem at all. I've got tons of it, even in the middle seat, as this centre console doesn't come too far back. You see, what's quite frustrating about this is I wish I could take all of the good bits of each of these cars and make the perfect rear interior for rear seat passengers, because I sit up a bit higher, I've now got enough headroom. I can also see nice and clearly out of the window, so it doesn't feel quite as claustrophobic. I've got a nice soft middle seat as well. But now I haven't got quite as much legroom. The Mustang Mach-E definitely has less legroom than the EV6, and this centre console comes further forward. So the middle seat passenger might not have the armrest digging in their back, but they are going to have to straddle this centre console, which is a shame. To be honest, neither of these cars, in my personal opinion, are set up to carry 3 people in the back. They're best off having 2 people that are a little bit smaller for long journeys. Storage up front in the EV6 is very good. This floating centre console houses a couple of cup holders, some wireless charging, and also some armrest storage. But it's actually hollowed out, so underneath you've got a massive storage bay where you can put easily a handbag. You've also got a 2-screen setup which are connected, and it feels very modern and futuristic. In fact, modern and futuristic sums up the interior of the EV6. Everything has those sharp lines from the exterior. You get cloth or Alcantara if you go for this GT line trim, but they don't feel cheap. They still feel really good high quality, and they're heated and cooled. I also really like the ambient lighting inside here as well. Again, it gives you that modern feel. Ford have a similar type of centre console, but it's not quite as user-friendly as you get in the Kia. You've got a couple of cup holders and you've got wireless charging, but I really don't think they've utilised this space enough. There's not enough space to be able to pop your handbag down there like you could in the Kia. You can also fit 1 mobile phone in the charging pad, but annoyingly it's not quite wide enough to fit a second mobile side by side like you could in something like the Tesla Model Y. You do get a decent amount of storage though. Underneath this armrest you've got a nice deep cubby hole, and you've also, again like I said, got that storage underneath, but I don't think it's quite as practical as in the Kia. Also, everything feels just a little bit more familiar when it comes to the Mach-E. The materials used, you've got this red stitching, you've got this carbon effect, and you've also got this material which houses the speaker system. But overall, it doesn't feel quite as futuristic as the EV6, and there's not quite as much nice ambient lighting either, which is a shame. They've gone for a more standard leather setup, which are really comfortable. And rather than the 2-screen sweeping effect that Kia have gone for, Ford have again gone for a Tesla-esque style, and they've gone for this massive portrait screen. This thing is huge. It's really easy to use actually, it's quite a nice system, and I really like that the climate control dials, though they are built into the screen, are always in the bottom at all times. You've also got this slightly smaller screen which displays all of your driver options. The battery lineup for the EV6 is pretty simple because Elsewhere in other markets, they actually get a 58 kilowatt hour battery with less miles. However, in the UK, we only get the larger 77 kilowatt hour battery. And that gives the Kia EV6 two driving ranges depending on whether you go for the two-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. So this two-wheel drive model has 328 miles of range, and if you opt for the all-wheel drive model, which is slightly more powerful, that reduces to just 314, so not too much of a compromise. I hope you're paying attention, because range and power across all the different Mustang options vary quite significantly, and it can get a bit confusing. You ready? So let's start by talking about the predicted range. So there's two options of Mustang Mach-E to choose from, rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. And unlike the Kia, this does get the option of two different batteries, and they call these a standard range, which is a 75.7 kilowatt hour, and then also an extended range, which is a 98.8 kilowatt hour battery. And between these two different batteries, there's 5 different configurations, and they all get a different predicted range. Those are as followed. The standard range rear-wheel drive gets 280 miles. Standard range all-wheel drive, 261. Extended range rear-wheel drive, 373. Extended range all-wheel drive, 336 miles. Plus, there's a top-of-the-range GT with a hike in power and a slight reduction of 311 miles. Now, within those, there's some impressive figures. There's not many electric cars that can actually do close to 400 miles, and the Mustang Mach-E claims that it's one of them. Now, I would be warned that a lot of people do have feedback about the Mustang Mach-E that it doesn't quite do its predicted range, and that may be down to the fact that there isn't an option to get a heat pump as standard. They do have a different system for heating the battery, but it's not quite as good as a heat pump, and this does affect the Mustang in colder weather. But realistically, it's going to be dropping around 50 miles on those predicted. Still, 350 miles is pretty impressive. The entry-level EV6, the one that I'm driving, is a rear-wheel drive car with a single motor and 226 brake horsepower. This car's 0 to 62 time is 7.3 seconds, which is very respectable. Performance from the all-wheel drive model is strong, courtesy of an extra electric motor, which means it has 321 brake horsepower and peak torque of 405 newton meters. That translates to a 0 to 62 sprint within 5.2 seconds. These models both have a limited top speed of around 115 brake horsepower. However, Kia's flagship model, the GT, is worthy of some much more expensive machinery. In fact, with 577 brake horsepower and 740 newton meters of torque, it will sprint from 0 to 62 in just 3.5 seconds, which is rather eye-watering. Next up is something close to every Mustang's heart, and that's power, and it has a lot of it. The entry-level 256 brake horsepower Mustang Mach-E gives you rear-wheel drive and a single motor. So that has a 0 to 62 time of 6.9 seconds, so a touch quicker than the entry-level EV6. Now, if you upgrade to the all-wheel drive dual motor car with the standard range, you get an increase in torque, and it's quite significant, to a whopping 580 newton meters instead of the rear-wheel drive model, which gets 430. Consequently, straight line performance improves, and the 0 to 62 benchmark is actually covered in 6.3 seconds. Now, the extended range rear-wheel drive car utilises a bigger battery, but that does make it quite a lot heavier, and then it makes it the slowest Mach-E, but that's still only 7 seconds from 0 to 62, which isn't bad at all. Those seeking extra pace might be interested in the bigger battery 346 brake horsepower extended range all-wheel drive model, which takes just 5.8 seconds from 0 to 62. But if power is something you really are chasing, then the Mustang Mach-E GT gets 480 brake horsepower, and that will sprint from 0 to 62 in just 3.7 seconds. But hang on, the Kia EV6 GT does it in 3.5. Oh, so that means that a Kia is quicker than a Mustang. Wow, that must be a first. The instantly noticeable thing about the Kia EV6 is, despite this car having quite a fast 0 to 62 time of 7.3 seconds, the power delivery is really quite smooth. As you put your foot down, it builds slowly, unless you want that instant power, and if you slam your foot to the floor, then you definitely do get it, and you've got to be careful doing that in the rear-wheel drive car because it will actually slip out, which is a good thing and a bad thing. For keen drivers, it's actually probably a positive, although the Mustang Mach-E does do the same thing. But this car just feels a lot more settled. It feels easier to live with every day. Over bumps and around town, it's quite refined. Even through all of the modes, including the sportier modes, it still feels quite settled. Driving these cars back to back, refinement is quite clearly more of a priority in the Kia EV6. That power delivery is much smoother, as I described. In the Mustang, everything feels just a bit more on edge, I guess is the best way to describe it. The power delivery is much sharper, but it's kind of harder to handle. At low speeds, it's difficult to get a smooth drive. You kind of always feel like the car is jerking along, even if you're in the slower speed settings like the whisper mode. It's also a bit more of a harsher ride as well. The chassis isn't quite so settled, and around town and on little bumps, you do feel them quite significantly. Now, I do know from reading up that actually Ford have made improvements to the Mustang Mach-E chassis to make it a bit more compliant at low speeds, but due to the fact that there is so many delays in purchasing one of these cars, nobody's actually been able to drive one of those yet to see whether it's made a difference. But I definitely think that would be needed here, as it just feels a little bit more on edge. So here we are at the end of the video, and what have we learned? Well, both the Kia EV6 and the Mustang Mach-E are at the top of their game when it comes to electric family SUVs. Well, bar one brand that we shall not name, and I'm not talking about Voldemort. They both offer a really stylish, practical and very capable package. And I think that if you're looking at getting into the electric SUV market, you can't go too wrong with either of these models. But which one comes out on top? Well, that probably comes down to personal preference. Let us know down below, which one would you choose? The Kia EV6 or the Mustang Mach-E? If you've enjoyed this video today, guys, don't forget to go ahead and give it a big thumbs up. And if you wanted to see more videos from me and all the team at Electroheads, don't forget to go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And one last thanks to Kia in Colchester for lending me their EV6 today. Until next time, guys, see you later.